This is a problem that we come up against again and again with successive conservative governments, that they want to be seen to be taking action, but without imposing anything which may inconvenience businesses. And I think the problem is that at the heart of where the government is this idea that there should be small governments, small states. There should be as few rules as possible when it comes to particularly how businesses operate. And that is fundamentally incompatible with introducing the kind of grassroots structural changes that are needed here. So what we're going to end up with is a situation where some people who have fantastic employers who get it are going to be given the support that they need, whereas other people will get nothing at all. So this is, for me, this is just going to further increase the inequality that we're already seeing.
There is a section, Natasha, within the strategy specifically for employers. Do you think the language contained within language like we strongly encourage employers to take action on things like mental health first aid within the workplace, do you think the language in there is strong enough or clear enough that actually people need to take action on this?
Again, I don't think that those employers who would already be reticent to introduce this type of change because they don't think it's important or they don't particularly care about the well-being of their staff are going to be moved to do so by this document. This document, by its very nature, is going to appeal to employers who already get it. And those are not the people that we need to be winning over at this stage.
In terms of the health and safety executive, they get a mention in regard to mental health first aid, which is obviously something the Where's Your Head At campaign is calling for. Do you believe that that parity between physical and mental health first aid is something we're stepping towards? Are we striding towards it? Does it keep getting a little bit further away? How are you judging that, particularly based around the language and the strategy out today?
The argument that you always come up against when you talk about mental health first aid in workplaces, I think most people are aware of the enormity of the problem of mental health in our society and the distinct dearth of psychological services within the NHS. And they say, how will this help? And my response to that is twofold. First of all, as you've already said, what we need is parity between physical and mental. We all have, or certainly businesses of a certain size have physical health first aiders in the workplace. And we understand that they are not a substitute for doctors, but they do, under certain circumstances, have the power to save a life. The other argument I always make in relation to this is that your first response, the first time you open up and tell somebody about your mental health struggles, that person, the way that they tackle that or the response that they give is so fundamental in your mental health journey. And I always share this anecdote of when I was struggling with bulimia nervosa and attendant depression and anxiety, the first person who found out about that at work, their response to me was, oh, so that's why I'm paying you, is it? So that you can spend money on food to throw up. And that induced so much shame in me that I didn't tell anyone else for years after that. And I always think, how much quicker would I have got better? Would I have reached out for help sooner? Would I have told my friends and family so that they could have clubbed around if that person had been more sympathetic? And I think the answer to that is probably yes.
That education required for that person who had that conversation, I'm so sorry that you had that experience, Natasha, that's awful. Is that something you can mandate? Is that something you can legislate for? Do you think there's sort of within the mental health world, there's a humanity around it as well, that somebody can tick a box and obey the law? It doesn't mean that you then respond in the right way. Do you think that changes could be made that means that education level is there, so at least then you don't get that response? At least if that you get that response from one person, there will be somebody else who can go, actually, let's have this conversation properly.
That's always the tricky thing when you're trying to introduce change. It's, where do you start? Do you start by changing hearts and minds, or do you start by changing the law? But I do think at some point you do have to mandate. And that doesn't mean that every workplace is going to magically become perfect overnight. But it does, as you say, mean that you'll have at least one person in your workplace who's been on a course, who understands that mental health issues are a spectrum, that the earlier you catch them, the easier they are to manage, what to say, what not to say, and where to signpost you to in terms of further support and advice that you might need.
I spoke to Simon Blake from Mental Health First Aid England earlier, Natasha. He said, this is a good starting point, but let's see the money, let's see the leadership around this, let's see the next steps, if you like. What will be your response to where the government's new 5-year strategy has placed itself in your mind?
I completely agree with what Simon Blake has said. It's nice to see mental health first aid being spoken about in such positive terms. It's good to see that there is an awareness that we need to be working towards having a suicide strategy. But it's so frustrating that these conversations, I was having the same conversations when I was the government's mental health czar back in 2015, 2016. It seems that it's taking so long for any decisive action to happen. And in the meantime, people are dying.